Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo! This week we leave St. Augustine, Florida and continue down the Intracoastal Waterway. We do end up spending a week at the treacherous Matanzas Inlet waiting for the tides to switch, and then we work our way down to Palm Coast Marina where we stay for a night to reprovision, and we finally end up in Daytona Beach. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. After the sailboat destroyed on a shoal debacle, we decided to stay in St. Augustine one additional day to regroup, and then the next morning we got up and headed down the Intracoastal Waterway. In the previous video, I had mentioned that the next closest anchorage was approximately 45 miles away, but I did find one about 13 miles down the river at Matanzas Inlet. I initially dismissed it. Sorry about that, dogs are running around outside. But I initially dismissed that anchorage just because it was very shallow on the charts and it looked like there was no way to get in there. Then I started reading that they had dredged it in 2017, and I had seen on AIS that there were boats anchored there, so that, I started to open up, the possibility that I might be able to stay there. And then when I was on approach, there was actually a boat that was anchored there called True Story, and I called them on the VHF radio and they told me how to get in without grounding, so thank you so much to them. I got in there and we actually ended up staying a week. So there are two things at play here, and one of them is straightforward and one of them I just haven't figured out yet. So when you're traveling along an intracoastal waterway, you're going between inlets, right? There are inlets that go out to the ocean and in, and when the current changes, water flows in and out of those inlets, as you would expect. And knowing where that transition takes place in a river between the inlets, I just haven't figured it out yet. There's a couple of ways I think about it. I'm sure there's a really good explanation somewhere, I just haven't read about it. But the water coming in, let's say it's 10 miles between inlets, you would think, okay, halfway through 5 miles, if the tide is coming in for the entire time that I'm in that 10-mile stretch, the tide's going to be pushing me one way, and then once I get halfway through between the inlets, that tide will still be coming in from the other inlet, the second inlet, so now I'm going against the current. So the first half I'm going with, the second half I'm going against. And that's not the way it works out. It doesn't seem to anyways. I haven't collected enough evidence in my head to work it out yet. I think there must be a volume component to it, which would make sense. I think it must be the size of the inlet. Bigger inlets can, more water can flow through them, a higher volume of water. So, they may push further into the river than from the smaller inlet. But then again, maybe because volumetrically, if the one inlet is volumetrically larger, maybe the flow is slower, and then at the smaller inlet the flow is faster to accommodate the volume of water, and it does change halfway. So, but that doesn't seem to be what I've observed. So I'm sorry to kind of hash this out, but I really haven't figured it out. So if you guys have a good way of telling when the tide is going to switch in a intracoastal river or waterway, let me know, because I haven't quite worked it out yet. So we did end up going the 13 miles to Matanzas Inlet, and we were fighting against the tide the entire time. I magically timed that switch so that I was fighting against the tide as it was going out, and then I reached the point in the river where it switched to the other inlet right when the tide was coming in. So it took us 6.5 hours to go 13 miles, so it was really frustrating. We were going on average about 2 knots the entire way. But we did finally make it to the inlet, the Matanzas Inlet, and we anchored there with the help from True Story. And we actually ended up staying in the inlet for a week. And that was due to the next leg. There was only one very small inlet right next to Matanzas Inlet, and then it was all intracoastal. So I wanted to get the tides to push us down to the next anchorage, which at this point was only about 32 miles away. And I didn't, even with the struggles we had getting to Matanzas, I wasn't even sure if that was possible. And we ended up staying at Palm Coast Marina, which was halfway down the next leg, so we could reprovision. I needed to get engine oil and some other stuff, so we'll cover that later. But anyway, we ended up staying in Matanzas Inlet because the tides themselves, you get 2 tides shifts in every 12 hours, approximately. It's not always the same. The tides aren't always the same height, and they aren't always the same duration. So it takes about a week. So if you stay in one spot, in the morning, the tide might be coming in at that spot. And if you wait a week or 8 days, then, or 9 days, depending upon the tide schedule, then in the morning the tide might be going out. So they do rotate. So sometimes on these longer runs, you just have to wait so you can time the tide correctly to get a boost, especially on a slower boat like what I've got. If you're in a power boat, just knock yourself out. Yeah, for us, those 2 knots make a huge difference in the distance we can travel. So sorry for the long, convoluted discussion about tides, but that's what I've observed. I haven't exactly figured them out yet. I know when to wait, when to go, kind of, but it does get a little muddy. So anyways, enough of the tide talk. Hey y'all, here we are we're anchored just off of Fort Matanzas over here. This is the Matanzas Inlet. And we've actually been here for 4 or 5 days now. I've been getting a lot of videos done and watching some playoff football and just relaxing. And the current is really strong through here. There's a ton of shoaling over in here, and I've seen no less than at least 14 boats get stuck. You can see there's a sailboat over here now that's stuck, and unfortunately I think he's going to be there a while. The tide's not going to shift for probably another 2.5 hours, and it might take another couple hours after that for him to get out of there. It really stinks. I feel for him. And even to get in here to this inlet, it was really tricky. There's this right up in here, there's a huge shoal that comes all the way out, and you have to stick right next to the shore here, about 20 feet away from the north shore, even to get into where I'm anchored now. The rest of it is just way too shallow over here. You'll run aground. Actually, when I came in, there were 2 boats right over by this green can buoy over here that had run aground, and they were there for probably 6 hours until they could get out. So yeah, I'm gonna try and leave in the morning, and it's not gonna be low tide, but it's not going to be high tide either. So I'm going to try and sneak out the way I came in. And I did come in at low tide, so I know I can get out that way and then go down and hug the red side of the channel, because everyone that gets grounded has been on the green side. I've even seen power boats get grounded, which you never see power boats get grounded, or very rarely. And yeah, I think that green buoy, when the tide comes in and out, that green can buoy does move. And when the tide is going out like it is now, I think it moves towards the inlet and leads people astray onto the shoal. So tomorrow morning is going to be a bit of an adventure to get out of here, but I think I have watched enough of what's going on around here to be able to make it out. So it'll certainly be an adventure. After spending a week at Matanzas Inlet, it was finally time to get on down the road, as the tides had shifted in our favor and we'd be getting a tide boost all the way down to Palm Coast Marina, where we were booked to stay that night. It was only about 20 miles to Palm Coast Marina, and if we left early enough, I figured we could get there around noon, as long as we didn't get stuck in this Matanzas Inlet where I'd been seeing people get stuck all week. And it was very windy out, so the camera kept tipping over, but I did rotate the video, so it's going to look a little odd when it fell over. And we did actually bump the bottom. In one spot, you'll see the camera and the boat rotate a little bit back towards the shore, and that's when we did bump the bottom. But we were able to pull right off. It was no big deal. And then we got on our way to Palm Coast Marina. After making it by Matanzas Inlet, we continued 20 miles down the Intracoastal Waterway and ended up staying at Palm Coast Marina for the night. We got there around 12:30 and we had a busy day. I actually took a couple of days off of filming, so what you're seeing now is us leaving Daytona Beach. After staying at Palm Coast, the next day we went another 10 miles down the coast to Daytona Beach, and we took a little bit of time off of filming, so this video you're seeing is us leaving Daytona Beach. But we did have a very busy day in the marina, and I had, excuse me, I had grand plans to film it all, but it's just too hectic when we're at a marina. There's just too much stuff to do, and I'm not a big fan of filming people like shopping and stuff. I don't know, it just seems kind of tacky. You know, if it's a drone shot from 100 yards away, that's one thing, but yeah, I don't like to be up in people's grills. So when I got to the marina at 12:30, the first thing I did was took the dogs for a walk, paid everything, and I have to say, Palm Coast Marina was super reasonably priced. It was easy to get into, currents were gentle, it was just off the ICW, and it was only $50 a night, which is the cheapest that I've paid for a marina. I thought I was going to get whacked, but it was really, really reasonable. The good news is I didn't need power. After it had been a month since we had left Savannah, but we were only down to 75% in our battery bank, so we'd been keeping up reasonably well. We had been trickling out, slowly losing power, but I think we had turned the corner for power. But I ultimately decided it was stupid, since we were at a marina, we probably wouldn't be at one for another month, not to top off the battery bank. So I paid the $6, and we did top off the batteries. So I did take an Uber to Walmart. I did have to get a bunch of stuff. I was out of engine oil and oil filters. I also needed transmission oil and water filters. And I got a bunch of veggies, because I love veggies, and I had run out probably 2 weeks before. So, yep, did a lot of shopping, got back to the marina around 4:30. That's when I took the dogs for another walk, and then I started doing laundry. Thankfully, they had 2 washers and dryers, and I was able to do around 10 loads of laundry. I did all of the bedding. We've got tons of blankets. I cover everything in blankets, so the dogs, you know, you'd think the dogs would stay pretty clean being on the boat, but they always find anchor chain mud. They find, I don't know how, but they find mud, and it gets everywhere. So I did all of it's only maybe 2 loads of clothes that were actually clothes, and the rest is all bedding. So we got all of that done. And it was a late night. I don't think I got done with laundry until about 10:30 at night, and then we were able to shut down. Got up early. We weren't in a big hurry the next morning, because it was only maybe 10, 12, 15 miles down to Daytona Beach, and we did end up staying for a couple of days in Daytona Beach. We didn't do anything. I just kind of unplugged after a busy marina day and just relaxed for a few days. So we watched some YouTube videos. I think there was some football in there, and just generally relaxed. So, yep, it was good. And then from Daytona Beach, we poked on down the road to New Smyrna Beach, which was not a very long trip again. It was maybe 15 miles, I forget, something like that. But that's where I am now as I'm recording this, and if you're watching this, I think I'm 5 videos ahead. But you guys are actually, because we're slowing down, you guys are actually going to be catching up, and you'll be a lot closer to real time. So we are in New Smyrna Beach. I plan on staying here probably a week. I've got some boat projects that I'd like to get done, so that'll probably be next up on the list. So, all right, hope y'all are well. And that'll do it for this week. I do apologize for a couple of those longer diatribes in there. I guess there were probably more screeds than diatribes, but whatever. I do need to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I definitely wouldn't make these videos, so thank you guys so much. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Edwin Sauter, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Joan and Jim Linbo, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, and Matthew Spotton. Thank you guys so very much for your support. It really means the world to me. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below, and that'll take you to our Patreon page where we have a bunch of bonus videos, bonus photos, that kind of stuff, and it gives you an up-to-date look at where we're actually at. I try and post 4 or 5 times a week while we're traveling, and it starts off very reasonably at like $3 a month, so it's not very expensive, and that gets you access to like 99% of the content. So, and you would help support the channel, which would be awesome as well. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That helps us out as well. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.